It's again time for high-performance Huawei watches with the Huawei Watch GT6 Pro and the Huawei Watch GT6. Huawei just sent these to me and I'm very excited to test them. Now this Huawei Watch GT6 is a quite feminine device. I'll give that to Raphael for testing and that's a separate video. In this video we'll focus on the Huawei Watch GT6 Pro. So the Pro series of sort of the sports performance watches of Huawei. Now let's first unbox it and set it up. Then we'll go through all the specifications and what's different compared to the Huawei Watch GT5. And then we'll get to the meat of this video, the testing. Now for those of you who don't know me, my name is Rob and I'm a postdoctoral scientist focusing on biological data analysis. And we'll compare the performance of the Huawei Watch GT6 Pro in terms of heart rate tracking, sleep stage tracking and GPS tracking to much of the competition out there. Now, I'm quite excited. Usually Huawei watches from the GT series do very well, especially when it comes to heart rate tracking. The sleep stage tracking leaves something to be desired, but maybe Huawei did an update this year. And finally, the GPS tracking is usually pretty good, but I'm excited to see if this one can do even a bit better than the predecessors. But as I said, let's set it up. But as always, first a quick coffee. So the box design is, as we're familiar with, basically every Huawei watch for the last 4 or 5 generations has looked like this, at least in terms of box design. And on the inside, there we have the Huawei Watch GT6 Pro. Let's have a look. So again, Huawei likes to incorporate some edges into their design. This time it's more of sort of an octagonal design, so 8 edges. I like this better than something asymmetric, though in general they still look kind of bulky to me. I personally prefer something more minimalist, something more clean, but it's already pretty okay, at least compared to some of the previous generations. What we also know from Huawei is that they usually still include a USB-A charger. Let's see if that's still the case. I hope at some point they will change it. Their rationale is that they also sell a lot in Asia, where maybe not all countries like to have a USB-C port already. And indeed, here we have a USB-A charger. Okay, let's turn it on. I'm excited to actually test it and see what the performance is like. Let's first see if it will even start up. There we go. I'll try to pair it with an iOS device first, just because it makes it usually a bit easier for me to get to my data. But Huawei devices always work with both iOS and Android, so you shouldn't have any issues there. Alright, the pairing is usually pretty seamless. Alright, there we go. Let's make sure that we have true sleep enabled, continuous heart rate monitoring enabled, skin temperature measurements enabled. Now I prefer a relatively clean watch face, or at least one that has an analog display. Alright, I'm excited to start testing it, and we'll actually start today with an indoor cycling session. There we go. But before testing, let me first explain what is different about the new Huawei Watch GT6 Pro compared to the previous generations and the general specs. And we'll do that in that corner of my studio right there. Again, in this video, I'll focus on the Pro version. If you're shopping for the non-Pro GT6, I've got a separate video with its testing, GPS, heart rate, sleep, the lot. So check that one if the standard model is on your shortlist. And I tested both the small version on Raphael and the larger version on myself. Now the GT6 Pro is made of more premium materials, in this case titanium and sapphire. The case is 45.6 millimeters and the weight is about 54 grams without the strap. And you get a 1.47-inch AMOLED display, and Huawei quotes up to 3000 nits of peak brightness, which seems to be what many manufacturers are aiming for now. Now I generally had no issues viewing the screen in bright sunlight, so that's good. Battery is one of the things Huawei promotes as being very good. Huawei's lab figures say up to 21 days with light use, around 14 days with typical usage, and roughly 40 hours of continuous outdoor sports tracking, so that's pretty good. You can get quite a few longer runs in. Now the GT6 Pro uses a new stacked special shaped battery that's supposed to boost the density versus the last generation. Now if we translate that, that basically means more battery stuffed into the same space. Water-wise, it's rated at 5 atmospheres, so basically swim-proof, not dive-proof. And there's a mic and speaker for calls and voice features. In terms of GPS, Huawei's pushing a new sunflower positioning system. I'm actually not sure how different it actually is from the previous sunflower, but basically the antenna is trying to be better at holding a GPS signal in places that can be typically hard to track, like urban canyons, switchbacks, tree cover, and so on. Huawei's internal PowerPoint charts that they shared with us show tighter tracks and a lower speed latency, but I trust the real world more than PowerPoint slides, so I've done runs and rides with that's a GPS tracking performance. And you'll see those later in this review. Again, if you want to see similar rides on the non-Pro GT6, check out that other video. Cycling is actually where the GT6 series changes the most. First of all, Huawei introduces cycling power, where they try to estimate your cycling power without using a power meter. Now the watch estimates your power using speed, gradient, your weight and your bike's weight. I imagine this is some combination of physics with some computer modeling. Basically, I think if you know the speed, the weight and the gradient, you know how much power would be needed to get up that slope, and then assuming some losses in that whole system, you can theoretically estimate the power you're putting in. Now I actually did a ride already yesterday with my Garmin RS200 power meter, and also of course with both the GT6 and GT6 Pro on my beautiful new Van Rysel bike. For those of you who haven't seen it yet, here's a nice clip, but that's just for my viewing pleasure. Let's quickly see how the power as calculated by Huawei compares to an actual power meter. Now I couldn't export the Huawei data, but I was able to overlap data from both in Photoshop, and the results are pretty interesting. So this is the virtual power as the Huawei Watch GT6 Pro measured it. So you can see there were probably moments where I was waiting or descending. So there it gave us 0 power. Then here near the end it was mostly a slow descent. So I had to pedal a little bit, but not a lot. And then here we had a couple of climbs with higher power outputs, though they were not extremely high. As I mentioned, I had to take screenshots, and we can put the screenshot of the Garmin on top, which I tried to scale to the same level. So the Garmin is in pink in the back, and the Huawei is that blue line on top. And I would say in the beginning it matches pretty well when there were no strong climbs. Then near the end there were a few climbs where I went a bit harder, so my power was higher, and Huawei wasn't really able to capture these fully, so some of the quick changes with also a higher power output weren't fully captured. And then near the end, when it was mostly descending and just pedaling a little bit on top of the speed I already had, you can see it actually predicted a too high power output. So it seems to me that the model is not optimal yet. It gives you a rough estimation, but high powers and especially quick changes are not completely captured. So I have a few peaks right here that weren't fully captured. And also when you're slowly descending, it doesn't seem to be able to fully capture it. Now it's not like it's extremely bad. It still somewhat matches in the medium range, but the extremes somehow don't seem to be fully captured. I think at least right here, for instance, the difference is quite big. And of course, those power meter pedals are also not perfect, but I do think they are better than what Huawei did, and probably Huawei even trained their model on data collected with the same type of pedals, at least what I could see from their slide deck. So it's okay, but it has its issues. The one thing that's tricky here is that my bike weight will vary depending on how much water, food and tools I bring, and even my weight can vary day to day by maybe up to 2 kilograms, even within a single day, depending on my hydration status, for instance. I can imagine that for steady uphill efforts, the estimation is pretty okay because it's an easier estimation. However, to me it seems that in those slow downhills and sudden increases in power, it wasn't that great at estimating, so that might be just a harder physics thing to estimate. So the feature is okay-ish, but definitely not as good as getting a power meter. I think you can use it to get some general comparison between the power of different rides, like a ride today and a ride tomorrow. You can somewhat compare between the two.
but the exact value I wouldn't trust too much. Now, as I mentioned, the weight of your bike actually matters a lot, and you might be switching between different bikes. You can actually create several bike profiles, and you can then select the correct one before starting the workout. So that's pretty well implemented. This works outdoors only, so no Peloton or Swift power meter estimates. You have to do an outdoor ride for it to work. If you do have a power meter, you can actually connect that to the watch, and the watch can estimate your FTP, so your functional threshold power. But it wants enough data, so you need to do at least 40 minutes of riding, with 15 minutes of that above 80% of your maximum heart rate. So you need to make a decent effort to get your FTP estimate. There's also Bluetooth support for third-party sensors in addition to those power meters, like a heart rate sensor. You can also broadcast your heart rate to third-party equipment. And there's sort of a phone as bike computer view, so you can use your phone as a bike computer using the Huawei app. You can also import routes from Komoot, and that only works outside of mainland China, or you can drop GPS files into it. It also auto-detects rides, and it has fall detection that can trigger an SOS. On the Pro, you also get some extra outdoor features. There's a bunch of extra details now in the trail running mode, and golf mode. I'm not a golfer at all, so I have no experience with that, but it gets vector maps with stepless zoom and more. Now, the new TrueSense health tracking system adds all-day heart rate variability, which is pretty cool. There's also a pulse wave arrhythmia feature, which shows you your AFib risk, but only in supported regions. The Pro also adds ECG, but again, this is only in specific regions, so check it before you buy it. But to summarize, what's actually different in the Pro version versus the non-Pro version of the GT6? Well, it's mostly materials and a few features. So the Pro has sapphire and titanium, it adds ECG, the enhanced trail run pages, and those vector golf maps. Otherwise, they're largely the same. Battery life and screen size are the same on the 46mm GT6 as on the Pro version. GPS systems, cycling features, health basics, and water ratings are all shared. Again, if you want to see the standard GT6 testing, I'll link that at the end of this video. I run the same kinds of GPS, sleep, and chest straps comparisons there, also on Raphael. Bottom line, the GT6 Pro keeps the same core platform as the 46mm GT6 that I have here. Same screen size, same battery claims, same GPS and cycling features, but it layers on nicer materials, ECG, better trail and golf tools. By the way, when I was writing this script, I realized I didn't test the cycling FTP yet. So let's do that with a quick indoor ride and see if Huawei's estimate makes any sense and if the two Huawei watches actually give similar FTP values. Let's first see if we can get both watches connected to the power meter right there. Okay, that was easy. Both are now connected, though they are not showing any power yet. Okay, maybe there's more to figure out. Okay, for now at least I cannot get a power meter working. I tried both the Neo 2's power meter that's built in and also the Rally RS100s. Both of them connect but then don't show a power value. So I'll just do my normal indoor workout and maybe I can cut in a bit here. Of course, I'm still working with beta firmware, so it might be fixed in the future. I'm just gonna do my indoor workout, and if there's any updates, future Rob will tell you that now. Okay, so unfortunately, at least for right now, I couldn't get the power meters working on either the Huawei Watch GT6 Pro or Huawei Watch GT6. So instead, let's take a look at the heart rate tracking performance. Let's start with the heart rate tracking performance for indoor cycling, so spinning, where here we have the reference values along the horizontal axis and the heart rate as measured by the Huawei Watch GT6 Pro on the vertical axis, with each dot a single measurement, and if they perfectly agree, all points should be on or close to the blue line. And this is looking pretty good, I would say. Most points are indeed on or close to the blue line, and the correlation is quite high at 0.99. So the correlation cannot be higher than 1, so 0.99 is quite close to 1. So a decent result, only a few moments it is detected too low or too high heart rate. Otherwise looking really good. But let's take a look at the individual sessions. This is the first spinning session with the Huawei Watch GT6 Pro in red and the reference in blue-green. There was actually one moment where it lost Bluetooth signal, so here you have a straight line according to the reference, but there's just missing data in between. And basically there's perfect overlap between the Huawei Watch GT6 Pro and the reference. So nothing to complain about here. Also here, mostly really good, only right here did the Huawei Watch not fully detect my dip in heart rate. And here there was a slight delay in picking up on an increase in heart rate, but otherwise looking really good. This one also looks mostly really good, though the dips right here and right here were not fully detected, though again still good enough. That's not going to make any difference for your training. And also this session almost perfect with just a slight deviation right here. So overall, nothing to complain about for spinning. But we can also compare these results to many other devices I've tested in the past, and that's displayed in this overview right here. That correlation value that was 0.99 is along the horizontal axis right here. And along the vertical axis, based on that value, I ordered the watches from worst to best. Basically, the further to the right and the higher device is, the better is its correlation with the reference device. And the Huawei Watch GT6 Pro is marked in red, and it's really among some of the better devices. They're not the absolute best, but let's zoom in a little bit so we can read some of those labels. So these are just the devices with a correlation of 0.9 or higher. And again, the Huawei Watch GT6 Pro is doing pretty well. It's close to some other Huawei devices like the Huawei Watch Fit 4 Pro, but also the Huawei Watch Fit 2. And we also have the Huawei Watch Fit 4 and Fit 3. And even the Huawei Watch GT5 not too far away. And I think that all of these will probably perform more or less the same. Here we have the Huawei Watch GT6 all the way on top. I actually discussed it in more detail in that video. This was just based on a single spinning session because I had less time to test that device. So I actually think it should perform about the same as the GT6. But again, if you want more details, check out that other video. Usually the best devices out there are different Apple Watches. And also the Pixel Watch 3 does really well. But let's next take a look at a harder exercise for devices to track running outside. And I actually still have to do a run today. So let's do that now so I can also include that data. And let's then have a look at the results. Okay, I just finished my run here in the nice Belvedere Gardens in Vienna, and I realized one thing. Just looking at my watch, it seemed like sometimes it was off a few BPM compared to the reference. Now, I'm not sure, this could have been a delay, so let's take a look at the actual data. But before doing that, if you're into running like me, but you don't know how to make the best running plans, I recommend the Runner app, which I think is the best app for getting personalized running plans and also live coaching during your run. Now, if you also want to check it out, use my link up here or down there to get a free 2-week trial. I hope it really helps you, so thanks so much for considering, and let's get back to the studio and look at that data. And running still looks pretty good, I would say, though we see some issues here. So the points are not quite as close to the blue line, and there is some deviation. So even though, for instance, this cloud right here is close to the blue line, it's still maybe 10 or 7 BPM too high for quite a while. And we also have a smaller cloud right here. So it seems that sometimes it detects a too high heart rate. So I would be really interested to see what's going on here. The correlation still looks quite good at 0.97, but I suspect there might be more deviations than this correlation value seems to indicate. But let's have a look. Here we have the first run that I did. And indeed, we can see that here in the beginning, for a while, the Huawei Watch GT6 Pro detected a too high heart rate. Later on, it was quite okay. Also in this run, it was often just a few BPM too high. Also right here, there were some delays in picking up on changes. Then near the end, it looked quite good again. This last run is really good, no real complaints here, a small deviation. And the run from today actually looks really good. I did some really easy intervals, and it was always able to detect my heart rate. So I'm not really sure why it struggled much more for this run, for instance, and also this run right here. We can say that it's pretty good based on these results, but it does struggle a little bit. But let's compare this correlation to the competition. But as I said, I don't know if the correlation is the best metric here. And here we have that overview with, again, the Huawei Watch GT6 Pro marked in red. And as we can see, it's sort of in the second tier of devices. It's not doing absolutely terrible. And it's even above the middle set of devices right here. And it's definitely not amongst the best devices. But let's zoom in a little bit. And in this zoomed in view, again, with just the watches of a correlation of 0.9 or higher, we see it's close to, for instance, the Huawei Watch Fit 2, the Huawei Watch Fit 4 Pro, and let's see, are there any other Huawei devices close to it? The Huawei Watch Fit 4 actually did a bit better on me, but again, this might just be because it did fewer exercises with the Huawei Watch Fit 4. I expect all these Huawei devices perform more or less the same. And 4 runs is actually quite a big test for me because I'm not a big runner, I'm just getting more and more into it. But overall, I would say it's pretty decent, though not quite as good as, for instance, the Amazfit Helio strap worn on the biceps or the Apple Watch. But let's now take a look at an exercise that is generally very hard for devices to track: cycling outside. Now, why is this harder? This is both because there tends to be a lot of tension on my arm and also because of the bumpiness during the ride. So it's just much less cushion than when running, though with running you can have cadence lock. But as always, the proof of the pudding is in the eating. So let's take a look at the heart rate tracking results for cycling outside. And here we have those results, which have the lowest correlation so far at 0.95. That's still pretty good compared to the competition, but we definitely have some deviation now. Luckily, most points are on or close to the blue line, but especially here in the medium heart rate range, we have some points above and some points below the blue line. So this is not perfect, probably still good enough, though you would be able to find slightly better devices than this. But let's take a look at some of the individual rides to see what's going on here. So in this first bike ride, the results are pretty good. Only here near the end is there a slight deviation, so detecting a too low heart rate. This bike ride is almost perfect. This one is also really good. Only here in the beginning a slight deviation, but this would be good. This is also good. This one also looks quite good. Also here, nothing to complain about. Then this bike ride, it actually struggled for some reason, so not sure why this one was different. Here it also struggled a little bit. Overall, actually looking pretty good. Also this long bike ride, I wouldn't have much to complain about. Here also looking good. And this one also not too bad. So here you can see that near the end it struggled quite a bit. So detected a too high heart rate. Overall though, I'm actually pretty happy with this result. Yes, there will be some slight deviations, but compared to the competition, it's actually really good. Hi there, quick interruption. I run this channel next to my full-time job as a scientist, and it's not cheap. I have my editor Alex to pay, and of course I buy many of the devices I test myself. The Huawei watches I actually have on loan, so they will go back to Huawei, but most of the devices I test I've actually bought myself. So if you want to support the channel, there's several ways of doing that. First of all, the most direct way is by becoming a YouTube member, which gives you early access to some of my videos. It's basically Patreon on YouTube, and that's really the best and most direct way. But if you don't want to do that, then I totally understand. Another way of supporting is by using my Amazon affiliate link. So if you buy anything at all on Amazon, if you first click my link, I get a small commission and it doesn't cost you any extra. You can even bookmark it if you want to support. And finally, there's also other affiliate links in the description below. Things like Rana, but also for the 8 Sleep Pod or the Aura Ring. Though if you get an Aura, I recommend searching for a discount link on Reddit. But if you wanted to support the channel, those are different ways of doing that. And of course, subscribing and liking would also be great. But let's get back to the analysis. You can see that in this overview, where the Huawei Watch GT6 Pro is among some of the best devices out there. But again, let's zoom in a little bit. So here we have that zoomed in view, and these are just the devices now with a correlation of 0.8 or higher. And unsurprisingly, the Huawei Watch GT6 Pro is amongst a lot of other Huawei devices, like the Huawei Watch Fit 2, Fit 4, Fit 4 Pro, Huawei Watch 5, Watch Fit 3. So it makes a lot of sense. Some of these actually have different sensors, but the underlying algorithm is probably the same. And Huawei does pretty well combining their hardware and firmware for heart rate tracking, at least on me. So overall, I'm pretty happy with this result. Yes, the Amazfit Helio strap on the biceps or the Apple Watch will do better, but generally pretty good. Okay, normally the next thing I would look at is weightlifting, which I generally don't recommend any device for. If you want to track your heart rate during weightlifting, just use a chest strap. That is by far the most reliable way of doing it. Unfortunately, when I sync my workouts from the Huawei app to Strava, weightlifting is never included. Now, I might be able to get a data export still from Huawei, but it usually takes a week and I have to record most of this video now. So if I'm able to do that, I'll add that at the end of this video. But for now, I want to move on to the next thing I tested on the Huawei Watch GT6 Pro, and that's sleep stage tracking. So can it track your light sleep, deep sleep, and REM sleep? Now to do that comparison, we compare the Huawei Watch GT6 Pro against the Z Max EEG headband, which is a headband specifically designed for sleep stage tracking. It's used in scientific research and it actually measures your brain waves. Now this also isn't perfect, but good enough to give us a general impression of the sleep stage tracking performance of different devices. And I tested the Huawei Watch GT6 Pro for a total of 9 nights. So let's take a look at those results. And here we have the sleep stage tracking result. Now, regular viewers will know this overview, but just to quickly explain, on top we have the sleep stages as measured by the reference device, and on the left the sleep stages as measured by the Huawei Watch GT6 Pro. And I normalize each of these columns to 100%, meaning that we can see what percentage of each sleep stages according to the reference was predicted as each sleep stage by the Huawei Watch GT6 Pro. And if they would perfectly agree, all these yellow values should be 100%. But as you can see, they're not 100%. Deep sleep was pretty okay at about 60%, so that means that about 60% of what was deep sleep according to the reference was also deep sleep according to the Huawei watch. However, there was quite some discrepancy as well. So about 20% was predicted as light sleep and about 15% as REM sleep. Light sleep agreement is actually not that great at about a 45% agreement and a lot of confusion with deep sleep and REM sleep. And REM sleep agreement is by far the worst at about 40%. So more of what was REM sleep according to the reference was instead predicted as being light sleep instead at about 50%. So honestly, not very good sleep stage tracking. Now this did include 1 or 2 nights with quite poor sleep quality because of some live events. I just couldn't sleep so well, so that could skew the results a little bit. But because I have 9 nights in total for this data, I do think the results are pretty robust, and I think that I can pretty confidently conclude that at least on me, the sleep stage tracking is not very good. But again, let's put these results into the context of many other devices out there.
Quick side note, another way you can see that the sleep tracking on both the GT6 Pro and the GT6 is not that great is the inconsistency between them. So this is the same night I wore both devices, and as you can see, the sleep stage patterns look very different. And if you look at the percentages, they're also super different. So you would hope if the same algorithm, which is probably being used on both, is working, then they should give very similar sleep stages. Anyway, when I was recording B-roll, I noticed this, but let's now go back to past Rob, who'll talk a little bit more about sleep stage tracking and then move on to the next section. And that's displayed in this overview right here. So these are many of the devices I've tested over the years, and all the devices marked in green were tested against the Z Max EEG headband, so the one we used in this video, with the average agreement over the 3 sleep stages along the horizontal axis, and the agreement of the worst out of these 3 sleep stages along the vertical axis. And where's the Huawei Watch GT6 Pro? Well, it's all the way down here. So it's really not doing well. It's really among some of the poorer performing devices. And again, it's super close to other Huawei devices like the Huawei Watch Fit 4 Pro, the Huawei Band 9, the Huawei GT5 Pro, the Huawei GT4. So all of these are performing about the same. That basically means that I expect that Huawei hasn't updated their sleep stage tracking algorithm over the last 4 years at least. And they usually port the exact same algorithm to any device, so you get more or less the same sleep stage tracking no matter what Huawei device you have. But what devices are doing well? Well, those devices are here on the top right. So those both have a good agreement on average over the 3 or 4 stages, and they also have good agreement in their worst sleep stage. Now, the best devices, so the 4 best brands out there are Aura, Nukua or Sleep 2, Apple. Yeah, Apple does just really well, at least in my testing, and H-Sleep. So H-Sleep is not a wearable device, but a thing that goes around your mattress and actively cools and heats each side of the bed independently. So if you're a hot sleeper, you can cool your side, which is for me a lifesaver in summer. I just cannot sleep on those hot summer nights. But with the H-Sleep, I have no issues. And because each side is independent, your partner can use a different temperature. That's also good. And in addition, the H-Sleep Pod also has great sleep stage tracking, and it can track your heart rate variability, and a lot more things. And there's even a cooling blanket now on top. So it's actually my favorite combination of sleep stage tracking and sleep improvement out of all the devices out there. But it's also one of the only devices that actually significantly improves my sleep actively. But it's really expensive, so only get it if you can really afford it. If you want the best discount possible and also support the channel at the same time, use my affiliate link up here or down here, giving yourself the best discount, hopefully a great night's sleep, and you'll be supporting the channel.
If you cannot spend quite that much money, an Apple Watch is also pretty good. It's a really good sleep stage tracker, but of course it doesn't actively improve your sleep. If you're on Android, you cannot use it. Another option in that case is the Oura Ring. Or if you want to go even cheaper, Fitbit devices also have pretty good sleep stage tracking, and any Fitbit will do. So even an old Fitbit Charge 3 or so, which you can probably get by now for $80 or so, that will do really well. Fitbits are quite unreliable in their quality of build, so it might break on you after a year, but it is a much cheaper option. So that's the sleep stage tracking. Now, sleep stage tracking is not something I would use Huawei watches for. You can rely on them to get your total time in bed, probably even a rough estimation of your total time asleep, but not the actual sleep stages. But let's next take a look at something that's also quite important and that Huawei is actually bragging a bit about in their PowerPoint deck, and that's their GPS tracking performance. They say that with their sunflower technology, they have great GPS tracking. So I did a bunch of testing. I went out cycling and running with the Huawei Watch GT6 Pro. So let's see how it did. Now for bike rides, the way we test the GPS tracking performance is by cycling the same route several times and then checking if the signal is acquired quickly and also if the signals overlap well. And here we have the results for 5 times I cycled to work. And as you can see, the signal was acquired quickly because I always start on the corner right here, so that looks good. But let's now take a look at the signal consistency. And that's not amazing, but also not terrible for the beginning of the ride. Usually watches get better over time as they acquire maybe more of the satellites. This looks pretty okay. This looks okay. Here it actually doesn't look that great. Quite a bit of deviation between the signals. Here it looks okay. This is also okay, not great. Sorry to use that word okay so much. Here it also looks marginal. I've definitely seen better. Here it looks pretty good. Here there's a little bit of deviation. Here it looks pretty okay. This looks good. This looks good. This looks good. Here there's a bit of deviation, but nothing terrible. Here we have a bit more deviation than I'd like to see, and this just doesn't look good right here. I definitely didn't cycle here. So a mediocre result, actually not as bad as I thought I saw before when looking at this, but luckily I also tested it several times. I cycled back from work and those results are right here, and I'm giving you a quick preview which doesn't look very good honestly. But again, let's start by checking how quickly the signals were acquired, and you can see that right here. So again, one time I started from this location, a few times from this location, actually a total of 7 rides. And luckily the signal was always acquired almost instantly, so that's good. But as you might have been able to pick up on when I quickly went through it, going back to this location, the consistency between the rides really doesn't look good. Look at how far the signals are apart here. And here it actually looks okay. This part looks good. But then what's going on here? Why is there so much deviation? A lot of deviation right here. Really terrible right here. And here it's starting to look a bit better. This looks quite okay actually. Here it's also not too bad, and this is probably actually a different route. So here it's actually still relatively consistent. Then here a lot of deviation again for some reason. And then here there's also a bit more deviation I'd like to see. Actually, it was mostly in the beginning in this area right here where there was so much deviation. It was maybe not quite as bad as it initially seemed, but it's definitely not good, and I'm not sure what's going on here. I've definitely seen worse, but I'm a bit disappointed with this part right here. But finally, let's take a look at the results for running. So those running results are right here. I did a total of 3 runs, and I always ran in this circle right here, and we want to see how consistently that circle is followed. But let's go through each of the runs one by one. So I'll remove 2 of them. So now we're left with 1 run, and this looks okay. So we definitely see quite a bit of deviation here. This also doesn't look very good, and also quite some inconsistency here. On the bottom here, it actually doesn't look too bad, but I've definitely seen better. And of course, I cannot perfectly run in the same location, but I do try to stay within a meter, let's say, and there's definitely more deviation here. And also some of these tracks actually go through some of the hedges and stuff, so I definitely didn't run here. That was the first run. Let's now take a look at the second run. So also here we have quite some deviation, especially here. I never run over the steps right here. Also, this really doesn't look very good. And also down here, we now have more deviation. So this run is also not great. And now we have the final run. This looks actually quite okay for the most part. Actually, when I ended the run, I walked right here. So this right here is a true signal. But there's definitely a lot of weird stuff going on. Here it sort of cuts the corner and it always has me going in quite a round circle where I actually have quite a bit more of a tight turn right here to stay within these hedges. So overall, this really isn't looking that great. I was expecting more, especially because of the way Huawei is presenting their sunflower technology as being really good. Now, maybe this is because I'm still using beta software, but based on this, I'm not that impressed with the GPS tracking. But I'm really curious once you guys get your devices what your impression is. As always, that was a lot of data in this video and I hope it is helpful. What is my own personal conclusion based on the data, and would I get the Huawei Watch GT6 Pro? Well, as always, there's a lot of nuance there and it depends. If I mostly focus on heart rate tracking, I care a little bit about GPS tracking and not about the sleep stages, then yes, it's really a device I can recommend. There's good heart rate tracking, at least on me, and usually if it's good on me, it tends to be even better on others, at least from when I compare myself to Rafael, for instance, or my ex-girlfriend. So overall, heart rate tracking is very solid. GPS tracking is pretty decent, though I've seen some weird results now and it's not quite on the level of, for instance, Garmin and Coros. And then finally, the sleep stage tracking just isn't very good. There are these new features like the cycling power, which can be good if you're getting into cycling and you just want rough estimations of your power level. And I think it's mostly good for comparing between different rides and seeing if your power is going up. I don't think you can actually take that value and really in the moment use it to determine your power right then. I think there's too much inconsistency for that. But overall, it's a nice feature. I think it was pretty decently developed. I just wouldn't rely on it too much. Also, if you're into trail running, for instance, it's probably pretty good. I wasn't able to test that feature in this video yet, though I'm actually quite excited about doing more trail running now. So if I get that opportunity to test it during trail running, I'll make a short or something about it. But I do think Huawei is working very hard on that, so it should be pretty useful. Though again, they're not a dedicated sports watch company. They sort of mix lifestyle with sports. So if you're purely into sports and you want the best features for trail running or like really long duration hikes, probably companies that have focused on this for many years are the most reliable. So Garmin is really good for that. Also Coros has a pretty solid lineup, and now the Amazfit T-Rex 2 Pro actually also did very well, though again they are newer to this scene, so there will probably be more issues with it initially, though the price tag is quite a bit better. If you're interested in that video, I'll link it down here in the description and maybe it pops up right here as well. Overall, the Huawei Watch GT6 Pro seems to be a very solid device, especially for heart rate tracking, and it's basically in line with what we've come to expect from Huawei. No big surprises here. And that also means, given that there's no big surprises, that it's still relatively hard for Americans to get their hands on Huawei devices. So if you want one, you're probably gonna have to wait a while for third-party sellers to sell it in America, which I actually don't know if that's illegal. But if it's already available in America or you're in Europe and you do end up getting the Huawei Watch GT6 Pro and you want to support the channel, you can use my affiliate link in the description below. Or if you end up getting a Whoop strap, an 8 sleep pod, another device, or anything at all on Amazon for that matter, you can bookmark my Amazon link, and anything you buy on Amazon will support the channel and it doesn't cost you any extra, and most of the affiliate links give you the best discount possible. Now, given that you watched this whole video on the Huawei Watch GT6, I think you will like this video on the Huawei Watch Fit 4 Pro or this video on the 8 sleep pod.